Thank you very much. So in your answer, you mentioned mergers. And one of the things that has been common nowadays is that many businesses and many companies have used this method in order for them to be more efficient and to capitalize on their resources. And in that respect, we would like to ask you, what is the current status of mergers in higher education institutions? And what do you consider the advantages and the disadvantages of having this structure new in place?
I mean, there's currently a merger trend going on. And I'm doing myself work within the Nordic countries with colleagues from Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. We have a book expected to come out next year, end of 2015. And we actually just met in Helsinki 2 weeks ago to discuss that. So the Nordics have taken, but they are not the only ones. There's been mergers in the UK as well. There's been mergers in other countries. Mergers are coming out as a phenomenon. Of course, the environment is becoming more crowded, more competitive. There's pressures for universities to be more efficient, more effective. And as higher education becomes a bit like a normal industry, size does matter, right? So this is what the rectors tell you, at least, that there are economies of scale and so on. However, what we see coming out is some of the classic arguments of why we are merging, particularly on the economies of scale side, don't really materialize. And also when it comes to the synergies, for example, in Northern Norway, we have a merger with the University of Tromsø that I presented today and the local college, and one of the arguments was we're going to bring the entrepreneurial part of the college, which has been traditionally more responsive, and then we will combine it with more of a classic university. Now from Denmark, we have some recent data suggesting that the synergies are not so easy to realize as that. Plus the mergers add an element of complexity, and mergers are costly, mergers are time consuming, and mergers culturally are quite difficult because you might bring together two different institutions. They have very different histories, very different profiles, and you have to make one organization out of it. So there are those in the literature that argue you cannot really assess the outcome of mergers earlier than a decade, right? For you to really see whether the structural and the cultural integration played out. So there are advantages and there are disadvantages. There's still a lot about mergers that we don't know. We know a lot about the rationales, right? They tend to be around those that I told you, economies of scale, the need to adapt to new environments, the size, be global, right? The national markets in countries where people are having less babies, that has a consequence, there's less students, so you have to attract students, but you also have to play on a global scale. Science, to a degree, particularly big science, is about putting a lot of resources in people. It's very costly, right? So you have to build those structures. What we know very little actually is about the process of merger. That's the goal with our book, actually, is to open what we call the black box of the merger process. How are decisions being made? How is the merger communicated, both internally and externally? What are the tensions? So how are they solved, right? So I guess you have to wait about a year to learn about that. But what we know also is mergers in the public sector are different than mergers in the private sector, right? One of the things we just learned, for example, is that the actors matter. For example, in many situations, also with universities, if there's good chemistry between the two rectors or the two central administrations, that facilitates the process. So this idea that we focus always in structures and processes, and perhaps the public sector there is very, much more distinct than the private sector, I think doesn't always hold. But having said that, there is indication that in fact you cannot take a blueprint. Each merger is unique in its own case, right? It's a marriage. For example, there's a suggestion saying that the most successful mergers come out of a dating process, like you do with with persons. So they date for a while, you go out for a couple of dinners. So even in the Nordic countries, the successful mergers we found out, they have been collaborating. So you develop trust, and then you build on this trust, right? Because there's going to be attrition, there's going to be tensions, and if the actors trust one another, right, it is more likely that it's successful.